Kratz?
Yes.
Roll, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? 6 in favor. Report of subcommittees, we do not have any. Next up, we have report of superintendent. Superintendent's updates and comments. Dr. Maurice Edward Vincent.
Good evening. I'd like to start with a public health update. As we noted in the last 2 school committee meetings, I will be incorporating updates on public health and COVID-19 in my remarks going forward. But of course, Ms. Hines, Mr. Murphy, and other team members are available to answer any questions you might have. Members, you have received our COVID-19 update memo in your email packets, and that document is also posted on the district website. We did see a slight uptick in positivity in last week's surveillance testing after we had dropped a minuscule 0.37% the week before. Our 1.54% positivity was reflective of both the concerning community-wide numbers and a cluster identified in a program unaffiliated with Medford Public Schools that our health services team immediately notified the Board of Health about last week. Despite the uptick in positive cases, we were very happy to report that we maxed out participation in our MPS students-only COVID-19 vaccination clinic that was held at the Andrews Middle School last Wednesday. Through our partnership with the Board of Health, we will be holding a second vaccination clinic for students ages 5 to 11 this coming Saturday, November 20th, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Medford High School. Please be sure to sign up, and we'll have additional communication about this event in the coming days. It will be on the foyer side, so coming in through the main entrance, that is one piece of information for people to be aware of. Finally, with respect to public health, today we issued a survey to both staff and parents and caregivers. The survey, which I have referenced in my last few Friday updates to the community, was commissioned by Tufts University, who, as you know, they have partnered with us to have one of the most successful COVID testing programs in the state. The researchers at Tufts University are seeking to obtain data related to the barriers that districts faced in getting students back into school and how we can operate on a more equitable basis when it comes to COVID-19 and public health in general. The surveys are voluntary, of course, but all MPS community members are encouraged to participate. So please check your email for that survey. Also, being that November is the month of Thanksgiving, I have notes of gratitude to share with all of you tonight. A special thank you to the families of the 5 to 11-year-old students who participated in a very successful COVID-19 vaccine. Again, that was held last Wednesday at the Andrews Middle School. Nearly 300 students received their vaccinations. But we also want to send out some special thank yous. First, to the Medford Public Schools nursing team, the city's Board of Health team, who worked really hard to make this happen. I would also like to thank our own CTE vocational health assisting students who are actively involved in supporting the vaccination clinic. It is so wonderful to know that we are providing our health assisting students with real life experiences and training. And we are so grateful to be holding a second clinic this Saturday. I do want to just make note that we were expecting 300 vaccinations for this coming Saturday, and we are going to have an increased number, possibly doubling that number if we could get up to 500 participants. So I do want to just say that in that section here. I also want to send a sincere thanks to all of our veterans who came to Medford High School last week. They took time out of their busy schedules to make presentations to all of our humanities classes on Wednesday, November 10th. We truly appreciate their service, and we were so glad to have been able to welcome them back into our classrooms this year. So upcoming events this Saturday, mark your calendars, the COVID-19 Vaccination Clinic. Please note that it is a location change. I did say at the high school, it will not be at the Andrews School. It is at the high school. And since the Medford Board of Health secured an additional 600 vaccines, which is fabulous news, we are really excited about increasing the amount of participation on Saturday. So please go back to the registration portal and sign up for a time. We will also have walk-in appointments available, so please do not miss out. In that same vein of talking about the vaccination clinics, medical help is wanted. We are looking for registered nurses, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, and doctors who are authorized to administer shots to come out and help. Please reach out to Ms. Avery Hines, our Health Services Director, at 781-393-2292, or you can email her at ahines, H-I-N-E-S, at medford.k12.ma.us if you are interested in volunteering at the vaccination clinic this Saturday. Also on this Saturday, the Greater Boston Girls on the Run event will be taking place in Medford at Hormel Stadium between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. I believe we are expecting nearly 1,000 runners, and Mayor will be participating and running with her team. So we wish them a successful run this Saturday between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. On Sunday, November 21st, our Mustang football team will be hosting the Alumni flag football game at Hormel at 11 a.m. on Sunday, November 21st. On Monday, November 22nd, the Medford Public Schools wants you to come join our Mustang family. The Human Resources Department will be hosting a job fair, an in-person job fair, from 12 noon to 2 p.m. and again from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Monday, November 22nd. There are many opportunities throughout our pre-K district, including substitute teacher positions, after-school aides, paraprofessional positions, kindergarten aides, teachers, and CTE, trade-specific positions for our vocational school. We also welcome retirees to join us at this job fair. And again, it will allow for in-person interviews with select staff. Please plan to bring your proper identification and wear a mask, again on Monday, November 22nd. We look forward to meeting you. Wednesday, November 24th, that is also our half day. There will be the Mustang Pep Rally from 11:30 to 12. We are at this time still working out details, but the pep rally will take place outside in the Field of Dreams. Again, final details are being worked out. On Thursday, November 25th, it is Thanksgiving. And we're going to say, let's go to our Mustangs as they take on Malden. The game this year will take place in Malden for the annual Thanksgiving football game at 10 a.m. Tickets can be purchased in the athletic office during Thanksgiving week. Again, schools are dismissed at 11:30 and noon on Wednesday for early dismissal. Friday, November 26th, there is no school, so it is a long weekend. On Sunday, November 28th, the Mustang Band parents begin hosting their annual Christmas tree and wreath sale at the high school parking lot from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. On Tuesday, November 30th, Medford High School will be hosting their first night of parent-teacher conferences, and those will take place in the gymnasium from 6 to 8 p.m. And on Tuesday, November 30th, the programs that will be highlighted are EL, our English Learners Program, Science, Math, Wellness, and Electives on Tuesday, November 30th for parent-teacher conferences. Our second event will be Thursday, December 2nd for continued parent-teacher conferences, and they will be again in the gym from 6 to 8 p.m. And on Thursday, December 2nd, the parent conferences will be for English language arts, social studies, fine arts, and world languages. So all of this information will also be posted online, but for those parents that are listening, please mark off Tuesday, November 30th and Thursday, December 2nd for parent-teacher conferences at the high school. November is National Native American Heritage Month, which acknowledges the unique contributions made by our first Americans for the growth and establishment of the United States. President Biden noted in the annual proclamation, we honor our Native American veterans and service members who have courageously served and continue to serve in our armed forces, including the brave Native American code talkers in World War I and World War II. This month and every month, we honor the precious, strong, and enduring cultures and contributions of all Native Americans and recommit ourselves to fulfilling the promise of our nation together. Lastly, since we will not meet again before Thanksgiving, I would like to take this opportunity to wish all of our families an enjoyable holiday. At the same time, Thanksgiving needs to be celebrated safely, and I am asking that all students, staff, and families rededicate themselves to our effective COVID prevention measures. It is important that we remain vigilant in our COVID awareness as we go into the Thanksgiving holiday. Outside of school activities could greatly impact our exposure within school. So please remember to wear a mask, meet with friends and family outdoors when possible, and stay home if you're feeling ill or recently exposed. So in closing, I do want to just share one final announcement that this Wednesday, we will be hosting a small clinic, vaccination clinic at the high school. This is in partnership with an organization that also was part of the Stop the Spread sites. This vaccination clinic will be taking place between 12:30 and 2 p.m. on the vocational side of the house. And the preferred age group is for individuals who are over 18 years old or meet qualifications. We did ask if there were going to be additional offerings, and we will get final information for that. There is a possibility that we may have some Pfizer vaccinations available for students that are 12 and older. So we will have final details on that very small vaccination clinic, which is hoping to vaccinate approximately 80 individuals. We will have the final details on that tomorrow, and we will advertise it widely tomorrow. That will take place on Wednesday, which is early release day at the high school. And those are my announcements for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Edward Vincent. If I may, just from the chair, the vaccine clinic on Saturday, because of the girls in the run race, we have moved that to the high school, which you pointed out. We just want to make sure people got a response that it would be at the Andrews. That's not the case. The vaccine clinic is at the high school. Change of location. Next up, we have the MCAS Alternative Report. Director of Pupil Services, Ms. Joan Bowen, will report on the district's result for the MCAS. The MCAS is administered to our students with significant disabilities who are unable to participate in the standard MCAS. The MCAS Alternative Assessment monitors student progress over time. Ms. Bowen.
Good evening. Tonight I will be presenting on the MCAS Alternative Assessment. As you know, students in Massachusetts are required to take the MCAS test, and they can take it in 3 ways. So the routine standard MCAS test, also the standard MCAS test with accommodations, or the MCAS Alternative Assessment. Students with disabilities take the standard computer-based or paper and pencil MCAS test, either with or without accommodations, at the grade level specified for assessment in that subject. But there are a small number of students with disabilities, with significant disabilities, who are unable to take the standard MCAS. Those are our students who take the alternate assessment. And this is about 1% statewide of all students with the most significant disabilities that take the assessment. Medford Public Schools had 17 students participate this year in the alternate assessment. And the alt consists of a portfolio of specific materials that's collected throughout the school year. And when I say the school year, it's typically September to March. And then the portfolio is sent into the to DESE, where they score it and then send the results back late in the summer. For each student that is on an IEP or a 504, their team decides how, not whether they'll participate in the MCAS assessment. The teams make the determination using the guidelines found in the principal's manual for the MCAS alternative. And our special education teams follow this decision-making tool. I've included it in your packet, and it's just a flow chart that they go through at every team meeting to indicate or to decide which student will be participating in the standard MCAS and which students will be participating in the alternative. And then they have to make that decision for each content area that the student will be taking the MCAS testing in. So part of the process is we have our teachers go to the training through DESE in the fall. There are sessions throughout the school year that the teachers can go on to get further training or to have their students' portfolios looked at and get feedback from DESE representatives. So once we identify the students going through the decision-making flow chart, each teacher will provide the student with a skills survey for each strand. So they have to do this for English, for math, and if appropriate for science, depending on the grade level. So for English, there's 1 reading and 1 language strand. In math, there's 3 strands. In science, there's 3 strands as well. Based on the results of the skills survey, they select entry points or access skills. And then the students participate in the same content areas as their grade level peers. So if we're starting at grade 3, it would be math and English. We also have our veteran teachers who have experience compiling and creating the MCAS alternative assessments, work with our newer special education teachers who are required to do this. So once the student is identified and the skills surveys is completed, the teacher has to set up the folder or the binder that will be presented to DESE. They select the measurable outcomes and classroom assessment activities, and they compile a binder following the DESE guidelines. In your packet, I provided you with an example from DESE, and it starts with the Strand cover sheet, and this just is 1 strand or an example of a strand that the teachers need to do. So they have to provide the cover sheet, which tells the learning standard that the work samples will be addressing. They have to include the skills survey. There's a bar graph with student performance that looks at accuracy and independence. And then there's also work samples that go along with it. So this is not a Medford Public School student. This is just a sample from the Department of Education. DESE. But this is the kind of work that the teachers are required to do for each one of their students. Once it's completed, the teacher meets with the guardian or caregiver and they review the binder and the parents sign off on it. Once we receive the parent's signature, it's sent into DESE where they look at it, they score it. We get preliminary results in mid to late August, and then we get the final report at the same time the standard MCAS scores come out. And then the parents and guardians and caregivers also receive a breakdown of what the scores are, what they mean. And there also is a scoring rubric, which I included in your packet. So they're looking at 5 different areas when they score a student's learning standard and materials that are sent in. They want to look at the level of complexity, a demonstration of skills and concepts, the level of independence that the student has exhibited when completing an assignment. Do they need hand over hand? Do they need visuals? Do they need prompting? Self-evaluation. This is the student providing feedback on how they felt that they did on the actual task that was at hand. And then generalized performance. And that's a demonstration of knowledge and skills that they have provided samples. And then I broke it down per schools. Mr. Cushing, Dr. Cushing, if you could go ahead. By each school and the grade level that the students participated in, the content area, if you can go to the next slide, please. So this is the Roberts Elementary School, and there were 2 students in grade 3 and 2 students in grade 4. And this is the achievement level that they received in those 2 areas. The next is the Mcglynn Elementary School, and I broke it down the same. So we had 3 students at the Mcglynn Elementary School that participated. There was a grade 3 student, a grade 4 student, and a grade 5 student. If you go to the next, which is Mcglynn Middle School, which is the next 2 pages, we had 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, 6th and 7th graders participate. And they also participated in English, math, and some participated in science as well. And the last is Medford High School. We had 3 students. We had 2 9th graders who took the science, and then 1 10th grader who took the ELA and math. There are several students that received an incomplete, if you see that on the chart. And we are looking at that right now with the teachers to determine why that was. Sometimes the learning standard doesn't match the curriculum framework, or there was not enough evidence that was submitted to support the student being able to receive the achievement of emerging, progressing, that sort of thing. So these are the scores. I do want to let people know that we did not include the out-of-district results in this report. We are still collecting those, and I will be able to follow up with those results as soon as we receive them from all of the out-of-district schools. But the next steps for us is we continue to make these determinations on what students require the MCAS alt assessment. Staff will continue to receive support from DESE. We are scheduling check-ins with the special education coordinators for their specific staff who will be completing the alt assessments, just to check their progress, answer any questions, make sure they're on track. The completed binders should be done by mid-March for the final review from the special education coordinators. And then we will obtain parent signatures and submit to DESE by the deadline of March 31st. Anyone has any questions?
There.
Member McLaughlin?
Thank you. Thank you for putting this report together, Ms. Bowen, especially in the short amount of time that we had. So I appreciate that this will be an ongoing report. It's interesting information. For the 17 students in the district entirely, participate in the alt based on the grade levels for MCAS requirements.
Correct.
And when you say the review with the binder with the parent and that there's a signature required in March, do you know, like, have folks, because that's sort of the first I'm hearing about the review of the binder with parent and signature. So is there communication with CPAC around how that's working and whether that's working, or with your coordinators around how that's working?
So
and
I
whether-
believe the signature is required.
Uh-huh.
So last year was very different with COVID, and
Yeah.
some parents may not have been able to come in to review it. So they might have reviewed it via Zoom and then had the parents sign off on a different, like a separate sheet and send it in. But
Right,
I know that's something that we are required to do, is to meet with the parent and to review the whole binder
right.
to make sure that they understand why we're doing the MCAS alt and all the hard work that the student has done throughout the year.
Yeah, that sounds like a really valuable process. I want to make sure that it's happening for parents because
Yep.
that's great. And we'll also, maybe we can check in with CPAC and ask.
Sure,
Thank you.
absolutely.
And is the review with the binder and the signature happening? And when you get the out of district, can you check?
Yes.
If the review with the parent
Mhm.
for the binder is happening with signatures on that as well, just to make sure.
Yeah, the outer district should be meeting with the parent. If they're not, we need to know about that because
Right.
they are submitting the documentation and the evidence. So we want to make sure that parents are aware that it's being sent in.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay.
Thank you. And where do the portfolios live once they're finished?
So once the portfolios come back, we've set it up so there's a cover sheet that provides us with the students' results. We put that in their special education binder, and then we send the portfolio home because it is their property. It is their work. So we want the parents to have it.
Oh, okay, that's great. Thank you. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bowen.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a report on professional development for administrators. Superintendent Resident Karen Williams will report on principal professional development programming that is occurring throughout the school year 21-22. Ms. Williams.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for having me. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that is coming. So this presentation is really an overview of the work that the district has been doing as a whole with its leaders. There have been several reports presented at committee meetings this year that explain the different levels of professional development and new assessments that the district has adopted. And this piece of the work is how we are building system coherence in the district. Next slide, please. I modeled the process of collecting data and determining the direction for this work based on best practice in education. Creating data cycles with student work is also important when you are looking at adult work. So we collected data and analyzed it through an entry planning process. When I joined the district, I had about 60 to 90 days of entry prep. And then there were goals set, and that was done in some sense-making meetings with the core team and the action planning. So this presentation is an overview of where we are to date, and hopefully I'll be able to come back and share out how things are going at another time. So that gets us into entry planning. So with the entry planning, I first began with a document dive. It was July and many people were still on vacation. So I was able to observe and review the newly adopted strategic plan and the ACEs framework. I looked at the strategic allocation of ESSER funds in the budget, the current teacher contracts and other contracts, as well as expectations for leaders, and finally, student performance data. This was prior to the most recent score report, but still relevant because of the goals that are outlined in the strategic plan. Next, I went through all of the current initiatives, and some of these are new. They're not all new, but definitely nuanced as a result of both the health and racial pandemic. So we know that there have been significant energy put towards parent engagement and social emotional learning. Next slide, please. I also conducted several interviews. I interviewed a variety of stakeholders, including some of our school committee members, leaders, teachers, and parents in the district, and I asked all of them the same 3 questions. Tried to collect data along the way, and I want to share some of that with you today. I was able to summarize some of those points, and um, a lot of them were consistent across stakeholder groups, but I did summarize statements for the sake of time, and I wanted to bring your attention to the highlighted one. People are really proud of the school district's COVID response. They credit that to the leadership team as well as the entire school community coming together. There are others here that I'm sure you'll want to read, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move to the next slide. When looking at a vision for success, what people wanted to see in the next 5 to 10 years, more than once it came up that clarifying roles, responsibilities, and expectations would help everyone move towards the same goal. So we know that the strategic plan was adopted in May, and so getting that communicated and out to everyone was really important at that point when I was collecting this data. Also, if you look at this, there's a strong desire for student-centered learning, data usage, autonomy, and accountability, as well as a team culture. So now I want to slow down just a little bit and talk about the barriers to success. Again, I summarize the statements after collecting conversations from a variety of stakeholders. So this is my language, but the community's sentiment. Communication is better, but not yet consistent enough or timely. There appears to be a gap in the pace of change and individuals' readiness for change, leading to fatigue, confusion, and frustration. There are too many silos for consistent collaborative work. There is a desire for explicit accountability systems that foster growth. And there is a need to communicate priorities and provide appropriate support through meaningful relationships. That data was so critical to the district taking its next steps with professional development for administrators. Next slide, please. So the goals for the monthly administrator professional development meeting, and when we say administrator, we're talking about district assistant superintendents, the superintendent, directors, principals, and assistant principals. So first, we want to define instructional leadership with a focus of continuous improvement. Not to say that that hasn't been happening, but to have a shared understanding of what that looks like, especially since the role of the principal has changed in the last 20 years. And we had a significant pandemic that has shifted the way we work completely. Develop data collection and analysis skills for decision-making. In the past, there has been several levels of high data, like the MCAS, access for ELL, but now we have NWEA. We're looking at story as a valid data point. We're collecting surveys, and so it's more opportunities for us to look at data. Develop a community of practice and space for deep collaborative learning and transformation. This is important because in the past, assistant principals, and directors had not all been in the same meeting at the same time. And so getting information from different places at different times means there's a little variation, and now they're all in one collaborative space. And then finally, developing symmetric structures of being and doing across the district. We know that we must honor equity. Every school has its own demographics, has its own needs, and we want to honor that. But we also know that there are best practices and quality around quality instruction for students, and we want to mirror those practices when we're working with adults. Next slide, please. So the current research, I won't bore you with a lot of details, but I have been researching adaptive and technical challenges, Heifetz's work, instructional leadership out of the University of Washington, system coherence, which is Michael Fullen's work, transformational coaching, Elena Arguelera's work, and data analysis, which is Data Wise in Action from Harvard. So what we want to do is take all of those initiatives, the barriers, the goals from the strategic plan, and figure out the lens through which we can build system coherence. System coherence is not just about training and skill development. It's about adopting a mindset and connecting yourself to the impact that you want to make. So of these 4 dimensions of instructional leadership, improvement of instructional practice is our focus for this year. Next slide, please. It means our leaders need to take on an identity of an instructional leader where they are focusing on data. They're looking at data through multiple cycles, building a collaborative culture, evaluating teacher performance as well as student performance, and creating space for public practice for continuous improvement. So we're taking our time and building leader identity through this work. Next slide, please. What's really important is that we recognize that all of our roles have changed in light of the pandemic. And because of the additional operational focus that comes with maintaining physical and emotional safety in a school, we are asking our leaders to do more than they've done before. So we must support them. This grid comes out of the Achieve Leadership Academy, and it talks about how when we have too much accountability and not enough support, it feels like punishment. But if we don't have any accountability, you're going to get yourself into either ignoring what's really the problem or enabling the status quo. So we recognize that though our students have progressed and we're happy that they are on target with the state, with the MCAS, we still have goals, especially around meeting the needs of students and marginalized communities. So we must support our administrators as much as we want to hold them accountable. So that is the work of our meetings. And the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Williams. That was great. May I just ask, so what do we do now? If you could just kind of explain where we go from here.
Absolutely. So I'll work with the administrators for the rest of this school year, and then I'm collecting data on my work with them, and they're collecting data on themselves as instructional leaders. And so hopefully we'll be able to report out some qualitative data on how they feel like their leadership has changed, how support in the district has increased for their role.
So with your data collection, you're still in the process of your review, but have steps been made to, I know, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Barriers to success. So have steps been made to make positive changes? For example, I know we had issues this past couple of weeks with our bullying policy and how we all just need, especially the administrators, principals, vice principals need to be on the same page, need to set policy, need to set guidelines together, review the policy together so that everybody's consistent. So are there any positive changes that have come out of this, or is that something you expect to give results for, say, mid to the end of the year and then move forward from there?
That's a great question. I think that policy needs to be set so that everyone is clear of the expectations. But when you get into each building and each leader, there are some nuances on how to discern a specific behavior situation. And that's where the collaborative space really comes into place. And so if a leader has a specific behavior incident, there might need to be some conversation on how others are handling it in order to both meet the expectations of the policy, but also meet the needs of the student. Mm-hmm. Because we know that no tolerance policies do not work for our students. So that level of discernment cannot be done in silos any longer. We need a collaborative community to say, these are our children and this is how we can move forward together.
Great,
Yeah,
Thank you. If, at the end of the year, I'd love to see your suggestions too, like
absolutely.
once a month meetings between vice principals, even if it's on Zoom, or just different examples of how our superintendent can make positive change for our students and staff.
Yeah, meetings have begun, and leaders were asked to interview teachers and students and hear their story.
Mhm.
They brought that to the table, and we analyzed that data. We've also looked at teacher observation data. It was blind as far as no names, but we're steadily collecting data that we have immediate control over, so we can put data inquiry processes in action now. We can't afford to wait another year for MCAS results.
Wonderful. Thank you.
May I?
Yes,
Thank you.
Member McLaughlin.
Thank you. Thank you for this initial report. Appreciate your data. Also, just want to ensure that the data collection and interviews with students and community members, what have you, are happening across all subgroups, which I'm sure they are, but I just want to make sure and put that out there that all of our subgroups, including our EL, economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, minority students, obviously, all across the board.
Absolutely. Thank you for making that comment. Again, we want to mirror best practice and create symmetric systems of listening and collecting data. And so we've talked about different levels of data, and story being part of that. And so just like I've modeled that by doing a variety of entry interviews, we're also doing that as an admin group. Thank you. Thanks.
Number 4, we have Engagement Hub Report. Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations, David Murphy, and Director of Family and Community Engagement, Ms. Megan Fidler-Carey, will report on the creation and ongoing development of the Medford Public Schools Engagement Hub, providing for the coordination of services meant to foster and deepen the relationships between students and their respective school committees. Mr. Murphy, Ms. Fidler-Carey.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, members of the school committee. You'll recall that last June, we presented before you as part of a series of presentations with regard to the use of our ESSER funding. And one of the initiatives that we were undertaking as a district through the use of that funding was the establishment of an engagement team and essentially an engagement department, which would change how we as an organization were organized with respect to the deployment of high-touch student service and family engagement. And so what Ms. Fidler-Carey and I are updating you on this evening are the initial steps we've taken to put that plan into place. And you'll see as we go through the slides this evening that there's both been some accomplishments with respect to our organization and a number of aspirational goals that we still have as we continue to further implement this initiative over the course of this school year and hopefully beyond. So on the screen now, you see our graphic that we rolled out last spring, showing how we're taking the existing offices and departments and helping to, essentially fusing those offices together in a hub model that Ms. Fidler-Carey serves as the director to, helping to facilitate cross-departmental initiatives and meetings with the other departments that have the high volume connections with students and families. The underlying purpose and goal of the engagement hub and the engagement team that we've established this year is in response to what we know is an exacerbation of challenges that families have with regard to the nexus between the school community and the student and the family. This is work that, as I said to you last spring, has been happening in pockets and corners across the Medford Public Schools, but not in the type of cross-departmental, intentional way that is a big part of the engagement hub. So the sort of new piece of the work that didn't necessarily exist previously is the team of engagement specialists that we assembled over the course of the summer, bringing together a very thoughtful, very well-credentialed, very diverse team of individuals that Megan's going to speak a little bit about tonight in their organization at the various levels of the elementary, middle, and high school levels. So that is essentially, that's one of the teams, and Ms. Fidler-Carey will talk a little bit about how those teams are interacting with the other departments and offices that we have. So I'm happy to take your questions afterwards, but I'd ask Megan to talk, as she's the person leading this work on the ground level, to talk a little bit about how that work is going and where we see it going from here.
Hi, it's nice to see you all again. Thank you. Some of the things that we do have in place are, like we said, what we're calling the hub directors are, I'm there as the Director of Family and Community Engagement, the EL Director, Director of Pupil Services, the Director of Health Services, and the Director of Counseling. So the 5 of us have now established a regular scheduled meeting every other week so that we force ourselves to mark time in our calendars to sit down and kind of calibrate so that those, those decisions that are happening in silos where you think, oh, I better check with the EL department to make sure that they're on the same page, but then, life gets in the way or work gets in the way and we're not getting to it. Now we're forcing ourselves to sit down at a scheduled time so that we can make sure that our systems are aligned and that if there are concerns from one to the other, that we're addressing it before before it gets to be some sort of fire. So the immediate things that we're addressing are looking at the registration process. So part of the engagement hub is the Parent Information Center, where families go to register their students, families that are new to Medford or families that have students that are just starting school. And we're working across all of those different departments to find out what's important to them or what they're finding from their constituents or barriers and confusing in the registration process so that we can address them all together and sort of problem solve. So we've been really working to streamline that process, simplify that process, make it equitable so that it's not kind of confusing for some but not others, and try and reduce opportunities for mistakes. And then the other thing that the next thing that we have on our agenda to work on is employing these re-engagement specialists from the re-engagement team. So the next thing we have is the re-engagement team. We've worked together to develop an organizational structure where we have them all seated in the schools. So, we explored ideas about them all working for all of the schools so that different personalities might jive better with different students. But what we realized was better was to have them become part of school communities. So we've got them deployed to the different, they each own a school. So we've got Kelsey, who works at the Brooks and the Mcglynn Elementary. We've got Craig at the Missatech Elementary and the Roberts. We've got Jamal and Stephanie, who are both working at both middle schools. And then we've got Cullen at the high school. Someday I hope to have a chance for you all to meet these guys because they're really have done a good job, in my opinion, of really becoming part of the school community and really getting to know a lot of kids and reaching out to a lot of families, which is wonderful to see. We still have a lot of goals set that we're still working towards. We really want to get some systems in place, systems around referral processes for the engagement team specifically. Systems, we're still working on perfecting that, that registration process. And then, with the hub directors, we're still figuring out what else we can be working on. We know that there are a lot of systems that need to be designed and perfected. But it's a matter of getting all those down and figuring out what all of those are and sort of challenging the way things have always been done and really, looking in the mirror and examining the way we've been doing things and trying to decide whether there's a better way to do these things. So we have a lot of work ahead, but I think we're really going in the right direction. Yeah, I think that's good.
So again, there's a number of different sub-threads to the engagement hub in terms of how these departments are working together and other places in which essentially it is new work that we are developing as we go. And that's a big part of the work that Megan is leading. And she spoke a lot about the sort of systems development piece. What's, I think, challenging and fascinating about this initiative is we are simultaneously looking to develop the structures and systems that will be sustainable beyond the current team, frankly, and for years from now, that this work will live in a place in which there will be an expectation that the departments are talking to one another, that they are collaborating, and that they are working together. And while we're building those systems and structures that we hope are sustainable and last long into the future, we're also on the ground, and when I say we, I really mean Megan's team, are on the ground attempting to provide support in discrete situations every day where building administrators or school counselors or teachers are identifying cases in which there are students whose relationship with the school is not as strong as we'd like it to be. And so I think that's why Megan and I spent a lot of time over the summer interviewing a good, competitive, diverse applicant pool. And what we feel strongly about is the group that we've assembled has demonstrated a capacity both for frankly having the patience to work with us as we develop these systems and rolling up their sleeves and diving into these school communities and building the relationships with staff, students, and families that we need them to in order to provide that discrete level of support that is particularly important this year as we come out of, hopefully come out of the pandemic. And so this is something that we feel very, I think as an administration, we feel very strongly about, and that we think has a tremendous amount of potential. There's still a lot of work to do. We had Megan assembled very eloquent and concise biographies of each of our engagement specialists that we'll send to you later in the week. And we did consider having the team here tonight, but frankly, like we're not looking to just bring this office out and show you like a good group of people that are very well intentioned. What we want to do is come back to you and report on with hard data and say, here are the number of cases that the engagement team has taken on. Here's some anecdotal information as to how they've been able to move the needle for students and families. And here's why, on the whole, we think we're better off as an organization and better positioned to serve students and families going forward. And that's frankly just going to take more time. We know it's happening. Some of you, I know we've been in buildings on tours with you and we bumped into engagement specialists doing their work, but it's still a work in progress, and we're looking forward to reporting back in the coming months. But as I said, or as Megan said, there's a lot of work that has been done so far. We're proud of it, and we're hoping that this will be a dialogue that will be continuing as the year goes on. So happy to answer any questions or respond to anything you'd like.
Sorry. I saw Member Stone's hand went up first, then Member Rousseau.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you just explain how the referral system works for people to see these hub leaders?
How the referral system will work, you mean?
But they're in the schools now, but are they not seeing kids directly yet?
They are.
Oh.
They certainly are. They are. That's sort of what I said. There's simultaneous work going on at the same time, right? As most simultaneous work is. One is building the structures like a sound referral system in which every staff member, whether it be an adjustment counselor or an assistant principal or a teacher or anyone in the building, knows that when a particular set of facts line up, this is where that case is best positioned. And then there will be times when the facts don't line up perfectly and it's not clear who in the organization will be best suited to serve that student and family and reestablish that relationship with the school. And in those cases, that's why the cross-departmental work that Ms. Fidler-Carey referenced with regard to the hub directors coming together is so important, because part of what happens in those meetings is they're going to be looking at cases and saying, based on this set of challenges, this particular student and this particular family, this is how the organization can best respond to make sure that we give that student and that family the support that they need. So that is the vision, so that we have sort of a flow chart, if you will, of who gets what case and when. And then the hub is there to catch the cases, which there'll be many of, that don't fit squarely within that particular equation. And that's where the directors have to come together and figure out how do we best support that student, that family.
But is there a ballpark of how many students, say, they've seen at the 4 elementary schools combined?
So it's right now at the elementary level, it's one engagement specialist per 2 schools. And so there are situations where a family has raised a particular concern, and the engagement specialist is an additional team member that a building administrator can refer a case to, and they can essentially connect with the family or the student, find out exactly what the problem is, and then help them troubleshoot through the organization to find out what we can do to support them. I don't have a specific number on it because it happens every day, almost every hour, where there are another staff member who's there to help. But what we want to get to is a place where we know, based on these circumstances, this is how we can best respond.
All right, I guess I'm trying to figure out, is there an epidemic happening that there's a lot of families that aren't being aren't engaged and we need more than 5 team specialists? I mean,
Yeah.
are they seeing 5 kids a day? Or are they seeing
It
one
varies,
a week?
it varies by the day and it varies by the school. And frankly, seeing a student varies by the situation. Sometimes to reconnect a family to the school community, it's one conversation, or it's, sitting with the child at lunch to get them, where they feel as though they're in an environment which they feel welcome or whatnot. Other times it's a year-long process of continuing to engage the family and exploring all the different strategies that we can employ to try to rebuild that relationship. I think your question as to whether there's an epidemic of disengagement.
Right.
I don't know that we have a official definition of what constitutes an epidemic, but I would say the pandemic has exacerbated pre-existing challenges with respect to the relationship between students, families, and schools. And part of this initiative is our response to that, to make sure that we're having a whole of organization response to making sure that we're keeping families and students connected with their schools. We will never solve this challenge, and we never would have even without the pandemic, by assembling teams of engagement specialists. We're not going to have like a Marine Corps of engagement specialists. What we need is for the organization as a whole to understand our responsibility to work together, to not be siloed, and to understand this is a primary fundamental responsibility we have as a district to keep families connected with their school communities.
Right, and I understand it's more of a triage, but I guess I'm thinking now, okay, so the specialist has met a family and they need a lot of assistance. So then, do they then meet weekly with the adjustment counselor? Do we need more adjustment counselors? Or I guess it's too early to learn what we're gonna need after the engagement specialists are meeting with all these families and students?
I don't think anyone, given what we're seeing and how we're prioritizing, know that we need to prioritize social and emotional learning, will say that there isn't a need for more adjustment counselors. But to some extent, that's always been true and always will be true. And so I think more than just sort of identifying a specific number and saying, well, if we get to this ratio of counselor to student, we're going to be fine. It's more about understanding that we have to, as an organization, prioritize engagement, because if we don't, we know we'll never get them to feel connected enough to have the academic progress that we know they need to have in order to be successful, or to receive the supports and services that they need to be successful. So I'm not trying to dance around your question. It's just that your question sort of gets to the heart of everything we're doing as an organization, particularly in this particular time period. There isn't like, well, if we just have this many people, we're going to be fine. It's more about understanding that this is an ongoing and continuous challenge that we have to recognize. And I think this initiative is one of the ways in which we do that, but it's not the only way.
So then at the end of this year, will the initiative tell us what we should be prioritizing with staff? I imagine there's going to be a need for more staff if there's many families being referred to the specialist.
Yes, except that the specialist will never have a monopoly on this work. It will always be a team approach of counselors, of teachers, of administrators, of engagement specialists, of community partners, of mental health support.
But the specialist is like a caseworker, so they're not seeing students one-on-one.
No, they could.
They
They
are,
could.
okay, I didn't realize that. So
They
they could
could.
meet with students one-on-one
Sure.
to have a counseling session, or,
I mean, I don't know that I want to get into it defining it as a specific counseling session, because there are some licensing issues there, but like certainly there could be an instance where engagement specialist is meeting with either an individual student or a small group of students, sometimes with
Okay.
family representatives. Their work is their utility players, essentially.
I guess I'd be curious if maybe another meeting to hear what their day
Day-to-day,
looks
yep.
like, because
Yep.
I guess I'm not grasping what their role is and how they're being utilized.
Well, I think that's a fair question. I think in some ways it's in development, but if you look through the deck, and I think in the last slide, I don't know how quickly we can pull it up, but there is a recitation essentially of the sort of like core job duties that range from the sort of like individual discrete case management to working with the district to try to figure out what type of system could we most efficiently and most effectively identify the supports that a student needs.
Can I add too? I meet with the team weekly, and one of the things that we're really exploring is how they can collect data. And so they're all working together and sharing the way that they're recording their data from the students they work with. And students they work with either one-on-one or in a class or in the lunchroom, So they're doing, first of all, they analyze the attendance records, and for students that are out of school,
Okay.
they're definitely addressing those students first. That's
Great.
their main mission. But then also, what can they do preventatively for students that seem to be sort of disengaging from classes or in different ways? They're reaching out to those students, and we're talking a lot about how they're collecting the data about that work and with whom they're sharing it with. Like, it's really important to let the counselors know if you've made some sort of relationship breakthrough with a student,
Okay.
so that the counselors can get that too. So we're perfecting that. I mean, it's not like I could show you this is our system of data collection. We're talking about that weekly and improving it and perfecting it weekly. So hopefully by the end of the year, we will see some serious trends in what we've collected that will tell us some sort of stories.
Great.
But something that stood out from the school in Maine work was, like, engagement is not one person's job. So definitely it's not something that they've passed off to the re-engagement team. That's still starting with the principals and the assistant principals and going through everybody. And this is just sort of yet another safety net that we're adding on to make the screen a little bit tighter.
Okay. Thank you.
If I could just add one last point, everyone in the district now is taking on operational duties as well. So these are not well-compensated monitors for the building. But at the same time, because of staff shortages, there are instances in which engagement specialists are covering various types of duties. They're doing it with the lens of identifying how can they continue to have that build those relationships with students, because that's their primary focus. I just want to add that because I think particularly when you have something that's new and a new approach, there are cynics who will be essentially looking for us to say they're out, building relationships with kids all day. And they'll say, well, I saw one of them doing lunch duty. And so to save us all time, I just want to add that occasionally, like, that happens as well, as it does for our administrators, as it does for teachers, as it does paraprofessionals, and given our staffing shortages, as it does for everyone. But that is absolutely not the primary way in which they're spending their time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Rousseau, and then Member McLaughlin.
Thank you. My questions have been answered.
Member McLaughlin?
Thank you. Thank you through the chair to my colleagues for the questions that were answered as well, because I had the same and have a few more. So I'm wondering how we have engaged. So it sounds to me like the goals for the engagement hub for this year are re-engagement around already diminished relationships around academic learning. Is that accurate?
I think it's a very important part of it. I think I would say the goal is slightly broader than that, because it's not just identifying the subset of students for whom they've sort of, the early warning indicators would say that this is clear diminishment of the relationship between the student and the school. As Megan said, there's also preventative work that's happening. And so that could be getting involved in extracurricular programming or other ways in which we're trying to keep the relationship strong, so we don't have to do the level of re-engagement that would be necessary. But in light of the post-pandemic context, I would say, yeah, that's a very critical part that is unavoidable just based on the volume.
Yeah, so I just would say that this deck really feels heavy on the re-engagement sort of specialists working on consistent attendant, chronically disengaged from learning, attendance and residency duties. So I'm hearing that as sort of a focus of this year anyway. And I'm wondering, again, sort of stepping back a moment and asking ourselves, like, where did that come from? And how did we engage stakeholders and what that was going to look like? So I know you have the hub directors, which I think is great. I think you definitely need the departmental collaboration, but how were families engaged in that process in terms of identifying what the goals would be for the hub for this year is one of the questions I have. Because I mean, I do feel like it's kind of the irony of family engagement is that we're saying we're doing family engagement, but we're not engaging families in what the engagement is going to be sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, there was no family engagement department per se prior to this. So I
Yeah.
think its creation is a good step in the direction of family engagement. And I think in month 3, I would say, we think it would be premature to say that there's been no family engagement. And that's particularly true because depending on the levels, the engagement specialist's work can vary. And so particularly at the elementary level, there has been a decent amount of direct family engagement. But I think I take your question to mean more helping to inform the vision of the work that's happening.
Absolutely.
And I think that's true, but I would say it's limited solely to the engagement hub. I think it has to be an organizational wide priority that the hub is a big part of, but not to the exclusion of all the other facets of the organization.
Right. How is this different? Are these engagement specialist positions differentiated from school adjustment counselors?
Various ways. I mean, I think one, it's sort of the utility of the engagement role is that it can be broader essentially, whereas the adjustment counselors have a more of a defined portfolio that is based specifically on counseling within whether that be adjustment counselor support or guidance counselor support. It's sort of an established lane of support. It's not unintentional that some of the engagement specialists bring social work and counseling background, because I think that is a really important part of the work. But generally speaking, I think the idea with the engagement team is to be a little more nimble in terms of both background and in terms of the types of supports that they would offer students.
Thank you. And just as
Point
a,
of information.
sorry.
Point of information.
Point of information, Member Rousseau?
Thank you. We did approve the job descriptions for the engagement specialist earlier this
Yes.
year, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
And so for the, what are the qualifications for the engagement specialist?
As outlined in the job description that the committee approved, but I think that was intentionally done to have a broad array of backgrounds. And so our staff, we have individuals with extensive school-based experience working as a paraprofessional to someone who was a practicing attorney working in a district attorney's office and eventually a school system. So again, I would say that that's intentional in part because, and I think this is one of the things that for Megan and I was really sort of a great opportunity over the course of the summer, is that we were both looking for talented individuals that would add to the organization, but also thinking about how the team would complement each other. And for that purpose, we wanted a diverse set of professional backgrounds because we knew that this is a department that was going to have to be nimble and flexible and respond essentially to the situations that we were seeing in schools. And I think that's, again, as we said, there's a lot of work that has to happen in order to really bring this vision to fruition. But I think we were successful in assembling a team whose background complements one another.
Thank you. And so that's great. And so they have a college degree required, not required, yep, required?
To be, again, I don't have the job description that the school committee approved
Yeah,
in front of me.
I don't remember it, so I'm asking.
I would assume that there's a bachelor's degree,
Uh-huh.
but I can't, and I'm pretty sure that as it happens, I believe all 5 individuals do have a bachelor's degree, but I can't, we certainly interviewed individuals who didn't have a bachelor's, and that I could envision circumstances under which someone without a bachelor's degree would be successful in this.
Okay, so it's a case-by-case basis on family engagement qualifications, is what I'm hearing.
I think what's critical from our perspective is to have a team that complements each other, and family engagement obviously has a very wide array of responsibilities and duties. And I wouldn't want to create barriers to an applicant pool. By the way, I'm not sure we're hiring for this role right now because this position's filled. I'd like to keep it that way. I want them all to stay. But I have I guess a general aversion to rigid academic barriers to positions that are more based on someone's capacity with.
Yeah,
respect
no, I'm
to-
not saying academic, yeah, I appreciate that. Qualifications can be lived experience for sure.
I thought the question was about a bachelor's degree.
Yeah, no, I was wondering if that was part of it. And we don't know because we don't remember is what I'm asking, right? So.
I believe it's a preferred requirement.
And then, thank you for the response and for engaging me for this moment. And then can we have, I know, getting back to some of the colleagues' questions as well, if it would be great if there were some data-driven goals and some flow chart for a referral process. And so maybe that's something that could be Megan, Miss Carrie Wilson, if we can think about what that would look like and how that could be visualized for the community in a visual flow chart sort of form so people know. So I guess I'm like thinking about it from a family perspective. If you have a concern and you want to be proactive, not reactive, right? And a family's looking for some answers, they don't know. Are they going to the guidance counselor? Are they going to the school adjustment counselor? Are they going to the engagement specialist? So I think there's a lot of confusion around who, I think it's great that we have options on who we can go to, but I think there's a lot of confusion around who we can go to and in what circumstance. So I think some clarification around that would be super helpful. I'm really excited about this. And I know that the school in Maine, we'll be talking more about the school in Maine survey, but one of the biggest outcomes of the school in Maine survey was building capacity for staff. And that was sort of, they said, if, we're not accomplishing that, then nothing will be accomplished really. So I thought that was really an important piece. And then lastly, I wanted to ask, in addition to all of the other responsibilities that the director has, I see that you're also doing oversight of before and after school care and functioning as the district's transportation liaison. So I guess I'm wondering, how does one person do all of those three? It sounds like 3 jobs and more.
I guess as the person who had those 3 parts of my portfolio and then a few other things, I would say it's a real challenge. And part of the organization that we did was to understand that, yes, Megan is the point person for these issues, but there's a team supporting her. So first, we have the 5 engagement specialists. We have 2 specialists that work in Parent Information Center. We have the bus vendor, and who I think Ms. Fiddler-Carey and I both have the opportunity to speak with on a regular basis.
I'm sorry, the bus vendor? Is that what you said?
The bus vendor, the bus vendor. So if the question is, does Ms. Fiddler-Carey have a very broad and challenging portfolio, I would say the answer to that is yes. And we've tried to structure the offices of which she has oversight in a way that will position her to be, her and those teams to be successful.
I guess the question is, and this is my last question, I guess the question is the need being met as a transportation liaison, particularly in addition to family and community engagement? I know the transportation was one of the biggest issues we've been having. And I think, are you also addressing the special education transportation? No.
Still falls under the special education department.
Yeah.
I think if there was an area that we would be like a staffing priority, transportation would probably be at the top of that list. It's not a priority that stays at the top of the list 12 months a year, which is why in our conversations leading up to the eventual establishment of budgetary priorities for FY23, we've talked about what might some options be with respect to building out that capacity in a way that makes the prudent use of resources. So that could be a part-time position, it could be some external support, but I do think in that umbrella, it's the area right now that would probably be at the top of the list in terms of staffing priorities.
Thank you, Ms. Fiddler-Carey, for all your hard work.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Oh, I had a question.
Oh, Member Van de Kloot.
Sorry. Yeah, so thank you. I think this sounds like very interesting and challenging work. I have a couple of questions. First, where are the engagement specialists housed in the schools? Have we found offices for them all? Because I can't believe that wasn't a challenge.
It was definitely a challenge. They all have somewhere to sit and somewhere to be. Some, depending on the school and what else they have to also house in their building. Some of those offices are more sort of desirable than others, but they do all have a space. The principals have been really very welcoming to the re-engagement specialists and definitely want to make them feel very comfortable and a part of the team. We've realized that was the most important part, was to make them part of the school community so that the teachers and counselors would, utilize them and put them to work, and so that the students would, trust them and want to be.
It's great. That was actually my second question was, part of this is that they have to find their place within the schools.
Right.
And to a point that Mr. Murphy made earlier, sometimes they've had to be utilized as coverage, but frankly, that sometimes is the time when you really get to see a broad view of students, and it can be very, very valuable to whoever works in the school. So I actually think, especially at the beginning of the year, that's an asset. Even, I understand it's time consuming, but it does allow someone to come in. Now, my other question is, so let's suppose said person, one of your, re-engagement specialist is something that we as adults understand the terminology. What will the kids call these individuals? Where do they fit in there?
I'm glad you brought that up. They'll be glad you brought that up because we've spent a lot of time from their perspective thinking about how they'll introduce themselves. And we've said re-engagement works for, the academics in the room, but how will they introduce themselves to families and to children so that it's much clearer. So they're working on words like outreach and advocates and so that I think they use outreach specialists the most, or family outreach or family advocates or family support specialists. That's how they like to talk about the work that they do. Because they understand that it's sort of confusing to use as you speak with families and frankly, they want to be the kind of depending on what the issues are that are making the kid not engaged to school. If it's, especially at the elementary level, it's the family that's not engaged more than the student that's not engaged. So the re-engagement specialists understand that they need to establish trust and establish relationships with the families. So they really make it clear that though their paycheck comes from the school, they work for the family.
I guess, I'm just thinking for the youngest kids, something
Yeah.
like a helping hand or
Well,
something,
yeah.
something, even a helper, I'm a helper. That someplace I can just see them being in the school and trying to say, how do they define their place with the title, which is child friendly. So
Helper.
anyway, just
No,
curious.
it's a good question, and Megan and I were talking the other day about how sometimes some of the most important relationships between a student and the adult start with assisting in the opening of a milk carton.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily need to like flash a badge to say you're with the engagement office before you do that. The student just wants his milk, and I think that's the type of mindset that was evidenced to us and the individuals as we were interviewing people. That we really wanted to see, and I think our building administrators would attest that that's the mindset they've exhibited as they've gone out and started to build their relationships within these individual school communities.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have number 5, hot water heater at Medford High School. Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations, Mr. David Murphy, will provide an update on the awarding of a bid contract for the repairs and or replacement of a hot water heater at Medford High School. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Mayor. Provided in the committee's packet this week was information related to the response to the invitation for bids that was put out by the city's procurement office. As I mentioned in the memo, the capital repairs presentation that you received a week ago this evening was designed in the hope of having as few surprises in capital repair projects as possible for the remainder of the year. Unfortunately, and I think in my conversations with Mr. McLaughlin and Ms. Maxwell in the procurement office with the city, it does appear as though our bids are reflective of some of the late stage pandemic pricing that we're seeing in a variety of sectors in the economy. And so while the estimate that we had initially received was for $170,000 for the replacement of the hot water heater at the high school, the lowest bid came in just a little under $370,000. That is obviously disappointing, but at the same time, this is a critical infrastructure repair that was put out as our first request for bids and proposals this year, due to the fact that we have some critical services that we will not be able to sustain if we don't make this repair. And so our recommendation tonight would be that the committee approve the awarding of the contract. The Enterprise Equipment Company Incorporated is the company that was both the low bidder and who we received positive reference checks on. And we are eager to get this work moving forward. I'd ask that if you do consider the motion, if you do grant us this approval, I would ask that the motion leave the administration flexibility with respect to the particular budget line that we charge. At the moment, we have capacity within the capital repairs budget that was allocated in August of 2020 by the Medford City Council to address this issue. it would be my hope that whether, that in all likely it would have to be a post-expenditure reclassification in order to do this, but my hope would be that the revolving funds associated with the services that the hot water heater allows us to provide would be able to defray that cost. Given the scope of the price, that we're not going to be able to, we're not going to find $368,000 in revolving accounts to pay for this in its entirety. But as I said, we have the capacity we need to in the capital repairs budget, and we'll just try to minimize the use of that if possible, due to the other capital priorities that were articulated last week. So I'm happy to answer questions to the best of my ability based on that.
Mayor?
Member Rousseau, and then Member Kretz.
Thank you. I have one question. How quickly can they get going on this? Because I mean, my next statement will be a motion to approve this, but I mean, I don't want to hear in 2024, we're discussing that they finally are able to start the work.
Yeah, I'm basing my, so there in a variety of areas, we have seen how supply chain issues and some of those other external factors are affecting timelines. And so I'm not really inclined to attest to any specific timeline as a result of that. My understanding, based on the reference checks and the scope of work that was articulated in the invitation to bid, is that the plan would be for this work to begin in a matter of weeks and to be completed in the month of December. So even though I just said I'm not going to establish a timeline, so please remember that qualifier. It certainly is our hope is that this work is completed in a matter of weeks.
Thank you. Motion to approve.
Member Kretz, your question answered?
Because I went through my notes, and I was surprised by the increase in the price, and you answered that question also. So I had in the notes from the Building and Grounds meeting that it was possible that when we approved this in May, that there might have been a possibility of getting a rebate.
Yeah.
So I was just curious about that.
Thank you, Ms. Kretz, and I should have added that. That part of the other reason I'm asking for the flexibility with regard to exactly where it's charged to is that we are hopeful that we'll be able to defray based on a rebate working with other offices within City Hall. So those conversations are ongoing. I'm certainly happy to report back on what the actual budgetary impact ends up being. But because we don't have full clarity on the potential rebates yet, nor do we have the revolving accounts. Revolving accounts obviously vary based on participation and a variety of other factors that we can't control. But I don't have I can't say specific numbers with respect to what the potential rebate could be. There's some energy efficiency rebates, which is part of what we're exploring. And I don't know what the capacity for the revolving accounts will be yet. My hope is that we fix this first of all, so that we don't avoid an interruption with respect to the services of this swimming pool, or with respect to food services, which we have some makeshift strategies to avoid, but it's still it's taxing. And then come back and I'll be able to articulate how we were able to reclass based on revolving accounts and rebates and whatnot, and then hopefully not dip into the capital repairs budget to the extent that we might have to. So yes, we're looking at that, and it's frankly, I wanted to get this before the committee as soon as possible to get your approval, and then figure out later how we can defray part of the cost.
Thanks.
Thank
Motion for approval by Member Rousseau, seconded by Member Van de Kloot. Please call the roll.
Member Graham? Yes. Member Kretz? Member McLaughlin, yes. Member Mastone? Yes. Member Rousseau?
Yes.
Member Van de Kloot? Mayor Longo-Kern?
Yes, 7 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative. The paper passes. We have presentations of the public not to begin before 7 p.m. Regular meeting minutes of the Medford School Committee include this presentation of the public agenda item to give any resident the opportunity to place a presentation before the school committee. A resident may only present once at any meeting. These presentations are an opportunity for the public to make a presentation to the committee, but are not opportunities for dialogue with the committee. If one or more members of the committee wishes to have a conversation about the topic presented, a member may request that the item be added to the subsequent regular meeting. The details for submitting a presentation can be found within the policy, public comment and presentations of the public. Pursuant to to policy BEDH, public comment and presentations of the public, any resident in the audience may be given permission to speak once on any item on the agenda for up to 3 minutes. The speaker is expected to keep their comments to the item on the agenda. The speaker must begin their comments by providing their full name and full Medford Street address where they reside. Residents may also submit their comments by writing to the superintendent of schools prior to the meeting or by emailing medfordsc@medfordk12.ma.us prior to or during the item on the agenda. Written comments must be kept to a length that allows for them to be read into the record in less than 3 minutes, or the comments will be summarized by the secretary of the school committee. A welcoming, inclusive community is both a value of the school committee and an aspirational goal. We ask for your help in achieving this goal and value your perspective. When writing or emailing, please provide this required information: the number and name of the item on the agenda, your first and last name, your Medford Street address, where you reside, your question or comment. Member Vanderklut, do we have any emails? Thank you. Okay, we'll check on that, but thank you for the update. Number 6, continued business update on maintenance of Mcglynn Elementary Kindergarten classrooms requested on November 8th, 2021. Mr. David Murphy, Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations.
Thank you, Mayor. The committee voted at your last meeting to receive an update related to some of the repair work that's necessary at the Mcglynn Elementary School. As I noted in a memo to the committee last week, we have identified a firm, GRLA Design and ESA Waterproofing Masonry Incorporated, which has been retained to complete this work. It was scheduled, and I believe I said this in the memo, it was scheduled originally to be completed the day after Thanksgiving. We've run into some scheduling difficulties with that and are currently exploring, just to be clear what this is the water testing of the area that had the leaks. So if you recall, a member of the community spoke quite passionately about the challenges that were encountered by a kindergarten class that needed to be moved out of an area of the building due to some leaks. As I stated at the meeting last week, and as noted in the memo, we understand as an administration this is completely unacceptable. We don't want our kindergarten students, or frankly our students in any grade level, having to combat these types of infrastructure based disruptions to their education. We have had multiple storms since the one that presumably precipitated the leak, and it has not reoccurred. But based on the history of the building, I've been advised that that's not something that we can count on going forward. And so that's why we're doing this higher level of water testing. But we want to do the water testing at a time when obviously when the students are not there. And there are some challenges to scheduling that in a holiday period or on a weekend. So we're navigating that right now. The very latest that this work would be completed would be during the holiday recess between Christmas and New Year's. But it's my hope that we'll be able to identify a way of getting it done sooner. But there are a few procedural hurdles that we'll have to go through to complete that, but it will not be done later than the new year.
Through the chair, when you say water testing, you're going to figure out where the leak is coming from, even though some patchwork probably has been done.
I'm going to hire people much more well qualified to do this. I'm not personally going to, but my understanding is that they will essentially be testing both water and the direction that the water is coming in. So the inference is that we have trouble in this particular area when it's a combination of rain and wind. Torrential downpours that are not blowing sideways has not caused the damage that you saw in those photos last week. The combination of rain and wind appears to be what the area of the building is susceptible to. And so that's the specific type of test, as I understand it, that needs to be run to determine exactly what needs to be reinforced in order to prevent this from happening again.
Member Vanderklut?
Just to clarify, so the students were moved, or was this an event where the teacher came in and found the water in the,
Yes.
after the evening or
correct.
weekend? Or
It may have been identified by a custodian or administrator prior to the teacher coming in, but
and the
this
students were moved?
to a different area of the building. They were not there when they didn't have like a ceiling tile come down in the middle of the class or anything like that.
Right, and then are the ceiling tile has been replaced at this point?
That's my understanding, yes.
And are the kids back in that original
Yes,
classroom?
they're definitely back in the room.
So they're being
It may have a temporary patch over that particular area.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes that happens before the matching ceiling tiles can come in. But they're definitely back in their classroom and have been, I think, since the day after the initial damage was done.
Okay, and this was one classroom at the Mcglynn, is that correct?
I think it was 3 kindergarten classrooms.
Mhm.
Three kindergarten classrooms were affected.
Same, but they're rooms next to each other, but yeah.
Okay, so
adjoining rooms.
one of the things which I'm just going to comment on is that I feel almost like our rules and regulations about how we address something, I think were unfortunate in this case, because we had a member of the public come up and show some photos, and it says we're not supposed to respond. And yet it was very clear to me that the superintendent had been down, that she knew a lot about this, that you knew a lot about this, but because it says we're not supposed to respond, that family who was sitting here walked away without any answers, and we did what we could do. We said, we referred it and asked you for information today. To me, there's a process thing which is difficult to me, only because if we're following our rules, then we're not responding to a person with an immediate concern. And I think it doesn't speak to the strength of the administrative team who knew everything. You could have answered the questions last week with a follow-up today or
Sure.
whatever. But I find that to be, as someone who's been on the committee for a long time, a very difficult place. And I understand we're following procedure. To the end, the only thing I could think of, frankly, to the superintendent is to say, please be more proactive. This was a situation you knew about. It probably should have been in your report so we could have spoken about it. So if something like that's the only thing, my sort of plea to you is to be, I think you guys did everything right, that you were on top of the situation. But unfortunately, when it was presented, because we were following our rules, it didn't look like you were as on top of the situation as you actually were. So
I think that's a fair point. The only thing I would say is for the members of the community, I don't think any answer I give tonight or any answer I could have given last week are going to like erase the fact that 3 kindergarten classes had to move out of their room, and that the photos were taken mid-repair, so they were never going to be aesthetically pleasing. But I think your point is perfectly well taken, and I think particularly when we know that there's going to be an agenda item and someone is going to speak, I think providing that information beforehand will be helpful to the committee and to the community member. I just don't want anyone to infer that I think tonight's response somehow fully remedies the challenge that those students and families faced, because I recognize that it doesn't.
it doesn't, and it
Yeah.
never will, because when things happen like that,
Yep.
it's going to be a problem for all of us.
Yep.
But on the other hand, since we did know it was going to be on the agenda,
Yeah.
if it had been included in the superintendent's remarks, we could have said, we're going to hold that until later. I mean, frankly, I'm trying to do a workaround around our rule, which makes sense for other reasons, but is sometimes challenging. And I'm not going to be here to do it, but I am saying
You could be the
to my
community member
committee
coming up and-
members,
Yeah.
this is an interesting dilemma. I'll
This,
leave it
in
at
this particular instance, we knew the agenda item was on there. We could have added our own agenda. So I think you're right. And I think we need to, we as a team, and particularly this is an area that, myself and the Buildings and Grounds Department are responsible for. we have to be a little more forward leaning in making sure that you have that information.
Because I guarantee you that when there's something like this particular problem, it's going to get to the committee. I mean, it's
Yep.
going to get, it's not a surprise.
Sure.
And so, and it also leads us to, just to ask the question right now,
Yeah.
are we experiencing, there's always leaks.
Yeah.
Are we experiencing anything else that you've got your eye on, that you're concerned about in
yes.
another?
Yes, I mean, we have a number of infrastructure challenges, particularly with regard to the high school. So I don't know of a specific spot right now in which there's water coming down. But I know there are areas that need to be addressed in a very comprehensive fashion.
Okay.
So this is.
Let me
this is
define my
particularly
question.
bad.
In terms of, this seems like possibly this is a roofing issue, is that,
It's been years.
say it again?
So I'll let you finish, but then.
Is this a roofing?
It's a reoccurring leak problem. I'm not sure if it would be considered walls or roofs, but I believe where the two meet, essentially. That's not my area of expertise. It's probably obvious, but it's an infrastructure issue that I believe is presumed to be a design flaw. But it's not one, I just also want to be clear, this is not something that happens on a weekly basis. There have been instances in which situations like this at the Mcglynn and at least one other school that have happened,
Before.
as I understand it, historically, and we do our best to respond. But I think it's certainly, it's somewhere between, I don't want to say it's isolated because I don't want to suggest it's the only time that we've ever had a situation like this. It's not, I have no evidence to suggest that it's rampant, the situations that are occurring.
Specifically, this isn't something which is going to be solved by putting on a new roof. Is this saying we need a new roof?
I don't know the answer to that right now.
So-
I think that's part of why we need the testing to take place to understand the extent of the
Okay,
issue.
so that will be part of the assessment to determine that.
Whether it's a new roof or a piece of a particular piece of the infrastructure, I don't know. It's just something that we need to do more testing on.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I wish I had
Yeah,
more specifics,
understand.
but I think when the testing is done, we should be able to have more details.
Member Stone, then Member McLaughlin.
Mr. Murphy, I know it was long before you got here, but the teachers from those classrooms have been emailing for years that periodically they had flooding.
Right.
So I am a little upset that it took a parent to come here with pictures to finally get the ball rolling. And this is long before you were here, Mr. Murphy. But I guess moving forward, and Kathy and I can both speak from being on the Building and Grounds Committee over the years, that not administrators, teachers or staff members would complain of a building issue and it never was addressed until it seems like a parent came and then it was addressed. So I'm trying to figure out, moving forward, how does the school committee, when we hear of these concerns, get the physical building concerns addressed without having to have a parent come out on a school night, take photocopies of 18 pictures times the 8 of us here,
Yep.
to move forward on our physical structures?
So I think there are two answers to that. One, as I think you've heard me say before, I think we do need a more extensive and more strategic capital repairs calendar. That's, as I mentioned last week, the documents that you received last week was sort of the first sort of step in that process of just identifying broadly the list of things that we know need to be addressed from a structural perspective. I think that's step one, and I think that leads to a capital improvements process consistent with how the city has started to look at their capital repairs in strategic planning. And I think we need to do that, and I think we have to do it built into a calendar that we know on either a quarterly or a semi-annual basis. You're being updated so that you know what's in the pipeline and what needs to be addressed. The second thing I would say, though, is that because the problem has persisted, I don't think necessarily suggests that there was no response. And as you said, this was before my time, but I can tell you that there are a number of instances in which there have been reoccurring problems and challenges that the district, through the Buildings and Grounds Department, has addressed, but has not had the capacity to address the underlying structural issues. And so I think that's an important point, because I have not been witness to situations in which situations like this have been ignored. I have seen a number of situations in which a situation like this has been addressed with a Band-Aid level solution that then inevitably reoccurs. And I think that to go back to my first point with regard to a capital repairs strategic planning process, I think that's how we get away from that Band-Aid type approach.
Member McLaughlin.
Thank you. I just, a couple of comments, I guess, on, through the chair on some of the discussion that's been had. I think that through the chair again, to Member Vandekloot's point about a family, a community member coming up and sharing information with us, which I think is a very difficult thing to do for a lot of people, not to mention the photocopying and everything else, but getting up to the podium and being on the screen and having your back to people and, you know, facing us can be very intimidating. And so I applaud anyone who's able to get up there and do that, and especially to point out things constructively in the way that the person did last week. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm not an expert, but I do believe in Robert's Rules of Order, which is the governance that we are held to, you can suspend the rules and ask that an imminent issue be addressed. And again, we can double check on that, but just to, again, through the chair, to Member Vandekloot's point, there are ways that issues can be addressed if they are imminent on the floor. So I think we can look into that ourselves, and the training around Robert's Rules of Order is really critical for the body. And then I would also mention that the good of the order that's supposed to be on our monthly meetings is another way that we can sort of address some of these issues potentially. So that should be on the first meeting, I believe, of the month. And then I just wanted to mention, so for the, sorry, just lost my train of thought for the, as for the Building and Ground Subcommittee. I know that, again, through the chair, Member Mustone was talking about the work that Member Kretz and Member Mustone through that subcommittee. And I think that there are opportunities to work with stakeholders in the subcommittee, in the community, to be part of the subcommittee for regular updates. So that's part of what I know some of the other subcommittees are doing, just in terms of regular updates for buildings, where then there could be some feedback in the report back to the rest of the committee. If that's a process that wants to be established, it could be done potentially through the subcommittee. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Member Vandekloot and then Member Rousseau.
Yeah, I just want to go back. In fact, as I recall, as my brain fog lifts, Mia is absolutely right. My colleague, Ms. Mustone, is, because I do in fact remember that we fixed this problem before. And that, you know, that's part of the problem, is that we fix problems and they happen again and they happen again. And with all good intentions, that people thought that they got to the root of it the last time. We had put together, if we go back at least 2 or 4 years, when we were doing the planning over what would infrastructure planning over the next couple of years, what projects we would see. At that time, the roofs were on that, saying, well, they probably have a shelf life of another 5 years or so. Well, that's back for at least 4 years, if I recall. So I think that document is one that should surface again. It does exist, and that those were items of concern back then. And again, it's difficult because they're big ticket items.
Thank you, Member Rousseau.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that Robert Rules of Order is part of our charter, actually, in the city, that's how we will operate. But open meeting law supplants Robert rules in every way. We cannot suspend the law. We could suspend Robert Rules of Order, but the law does make it quite clear that we can't discuss something not on the agenda unless it's an emergency. In an emergency, a leak that was already done, there's nobody who believes that would be considered an emergency. If we had a fire in the school building this morning, we can talk about it tonight. That's an emergency. But a leak that is no longer happening, I certainly wouldn't want to be at the Attorney General's office trying to explain why that's considered an emergency and that the law should be suspended. So I just wanted to clarify that, no, we cannot discuss or suspend the rules, because suspending the rules does not suspend the law.
Point of information.
Point of information, Member McLaughlin.
And I guess the question to that is whether that folks knew that that leak was fixed or not, and whether that would constitute an emergency. And I think that the body votes on that, not an individual. So I would say that the body, it could be put to the body for a question for suspension.
Could be pushed to the body for a vote, but I think the administration's heard us loud and clear. If a resident has an issue that is, we have an answer to, we will also put it on as an agenda item or in the superintendent's updates so that we
Well,
can discuss.
If I could go just one little floor, it's not if a resident has has an issue, it's asking the administration that if something like this occurs again, where children are moved out of a classroom because of, a major issue like this, that you let us, that you include it in the report of the superintendent, because I think that's the easiest way to have it on the agenda.
Or have it as a
Yeah.
report.
Yeah.
Yep, or a report that we can
So
discuss.
it's just my thought.
Member Graham.
I think last week we also talked about revising the ongoing process of capital planning, and we talked about doing that in like January, February, pre-budget time, which I still think is a good time to do it. And I think we need to start to be exceedingly clear about when we're putting Band-Aids on things and when we're fixing things systemically. So if we say we fix something 3 times, we put 3 Band-Aids on, we did not fix it. And I think it's misleading and problematic when we tell the community we spent money and fixed something, and then we have to tell them we need more money because we actually, turns out we didn't fix it. It calls to question the competence of us as a district, which I think is hugely problematic. I think there's lots of cases where things that are unforeseen happen, and Band-Aids are the actual only thing you can do in the moment so that you can continue to operate. But as a committee, we need to get serious about all the things that require money in this district, roofs among them. We have a whole bunch of buildings with end-of-life roofs, and the community is going to be shocked when we have roof problems if we don't start to tell folks proactively what our plan is to fix the roofs and replace them. So I think, I know all of this costs money. I know that's wildly unpopular to discuss, but I think our kids deserve to go to school in buildings that don't have roof problems, that don't have leaks, and that we are committed to the amount of preventative maintenance that allows us to make the most out of the life of our infrastructure. And when that life is over, we need to be in a position to take care of it before it's 5 years past the end of life, so that we are not faced with situations like we frankly are right now across a myriad of issues where we have things that need to be replaced and haven't been. So to me, like, we can't keep saying we fix things if we put Band-Aids on them. We have to do capital planning in a serious way and in a thoughtful way so that we can contemplate the real cost of things, and then we can communicate that through the budget process, through the capital improvement process, to the mayor, to the community, and to all the other people who are going to ask to support us financially. So it's past time for us to do this, and we need to start expeditiously.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Murphy. We have new business, motion for updated budget schedule to ensure competitive hiring practices. Whereas Medford Public Schools has historically conducted the annual budgeting process commencing in April and concluding in June, whereas there's a substantive increase in COVID-related funding in fiscal year '22, whereas hiring practices in many districts are finalized by March, April, be resolved, the Medford Public Schools budgeting process commence in January and conclude in March with budget recommendations presented to the City Council in March. Submitted by Member McLaughlin and Member Rousseau. Member McLaughlin? Member
Thank you.
Rousseau?
I think the motion speaks for itself, and especially after just hearing from Member Graham about the issues needed to address the budget. I think it's imperative that we address the budget sooner and get on a cycle that where we have competitive hiring processes for our staff.
Member Van de Kloot?
Yeah, I just would like to ask the administration as to whether a timetable like this is doable, realistic, and what, if not, what would be realistic, given the obvious desire of the committee to move the budget discussions up earlier.
So in response to that, the third bullet about whereas hiring practices in many districts are finalized in March and April, it would be our desire to be able to be equally competitive with other districts. A lot of the strongest candidates are scooped up right in the middle of whether they're new graduates, but they're scooped up much earlier than when we have access to trying to recruit competitive candidates. It's going to take a lot of work for us to be able to move the timetable up, but I think it will put us in a stronger, more strategic position to be able to recruit stronger talent to bring to Medford. So we will work hard to meet the new deadline, but in the end, it will benefit us as a district.
Great.
Motion to
Excellent.
approve?
Has, if I may, from the chair, has the budget discussion started internally? Is this like January date feasible, or I just want to make sure we're not setting anybody up for failure? Like, would February,
Mr. Murphy, would you mind coming up?
February, or I just want to be realistic, because I know the side's gonna have to give a number, and that's gonna, we usually do that in January, so I just need to get on this myself if, just your microphone.
Thank you, Mayor. I think what I would say is that our budget process is a continuous one, and so it's ongoing throughout the year, and I think it's necessary. I take the motion based on what I've read in the agenda to indicate that the school committee would like the public discussion and examination of the district's budgetary priorities to occur earlier in the year, which is something that the administration has spoken about with regularity about the need to do that. With respect to the hiring process, I would actually say that there's going to be variables that are beyond our control with respect to the budget process, both at the city and state level, and frankly, potentially the federal level. And so I think it would be more accurate to say that we are, whether it's through this motion or just through the practices that we're attempting to develop that we forecasted during last year's budget process, to decouple the budget process with the hiring process. We know year in and year out, generally, how many positions we're going to hire for. And on occasion, there's a question about, well, this is going to be a staffing strategy that we're going to pursue if we have the budgetary capacity for it. And in those instances, we likely would need to wait until final adoption of the budget, which for whatever process plays out at the school committee level, we'll need, as I said, we'll need the city and the state to finalize their processes before we can truly make those types of commitments. But at the same time, every year there are, at the beginning of the budget process, we know whether it's because it's a top priority of the committee or because we have a general understanding as to what our capacity will be. We know, or frankly, because we know there are impending vacancies that will need to be replaced. We know that there are staffing priorities that we can pursue by changing our recruitment strategies and those timelines that are not, frankly, interwoven with the budget. And I think that that's something that it's imperative that we do. That's what's going to put us in a position to be more competitive. And if the committee would like us to present publicly on budgetary priorities earlier in the year, we can absolutely do that, understanding that there are variables and judgments that evolve over time. I don't know if the budgetary priorities, which reflected a significant increase in investment in FY22, would have been the same if we were somehow locked into priorities as early as March. I suspect they wouldn't be. But that doesn't mean that we can't begin that process, begin that public discussion, and begin that scrutiny earlier. And as a general rule, I think it's a good idea that we do that. So the answer to the mayor's question is that yes, the budget process has started in the sense that it's never stopped. In terms of the more formal public process, in terms of the presentations to the school committee or to subcommittees or to committees of the whole, I would suggest that I think we need direction from the committee as to exactly what form you want those to take, because it's not going to have any impact in terms of the quality of our advocacy our budget number or our hiring process if we just take everything that we used to do in April and May and move it up to January and February. That's going to be irrelevant. It's not going to be problematic, and I don't have any objection to this motion, but it's the other practices that we'll have to adjust in order to truly put us in a more competitive position.
Thank you. Okay, motion on the floor.
Mayor?
Member Graham.
So I agree with you. I think there is no reason that the committee is prohibiting you all from hiring the best candidates. And if that's not happening, that's a process issue that can be fixed. And you actually don't need our permission to do that. So I hope that you will, because having competitive hiring process is more important than it's ever been in the right now. So I think that's critically important. 2 years ago, when we kicked off the budget process, we had a committee of the whole. And one of the things we did in that committee of the whole was talk about what should the process look like and be. And I'm not personally wed to the way that we handle our budget meetings or historically have. I think that if we want to have a discussion about how we want that public process to work and where and when it happens, what I would suggest is that we have a committee of the whole that is dedicated to that discussion. We all agree on what that's going to look like so that when you give us documentation, it meets sort of what we were expecting it to meet. And we can talk about a reasonable schedule that does not include having 5 meetings in the month of May to jam this in. And maybe it does or doesn't include 25 or 30 administrators coming before us. So I think there's a whole bunch of opportunity for a better process than we have today. And I am open to that discussion in January if we want to schedule that.
So maybe amended as we approve this in concept, but have a committee of the whole meeting in January to discuss how the process will lay out.
I think I appreciate that. I think it's a good suggestion, a good point by Ms. Graham. What I would suggest is that at the committee of the whole, the administration bring forth an initial presentation for the committee to consider. And then I think that will help to have a thoughtful discussion about what the budget process as a whole could look like. I think as a general net rule, I hear agreement with regard to the resolution that the committee wants the process earlier in the year. As I said, I think that's something that the administration has spoken about with regularity, that we think we should do that, but understand that the finalization of the budget involves variables that are beyond our control. And what I don't want is for the community to have a misunderstanding as to what the school administration or the school committee can do as early as March. We can identify priorities, we can advocate for them, and as you did last year, you can take a vote to make a request to the municipal government. But the state allocation and the municipal allocation ultimately, lives in a different body, and we just have to be clear and transparent about that. But yeah, I think preparing for a committee of the whole meeting in January that starts with essentially a proposal as to what the budget process could look like, hand that to the school committee, allow you to discuss to make sure that it's consistent with your expectations and the expectations of the community, and then we execute that process with an understanding that we want as much of it sort of front loaded as possible, so we have as clear a picture as possible by March. I think both gets to the essence of the resolution before you and some of the better practices that we've all said that we want to pursue in future budget years.
Great. So motion for approval as amended. Roll.
I'd like to restate the motion then, so that it's the motion is as is with an amendment that it commences with a committee of the whole meeting that will lay out a proposed process for the January through March. So that's for Susie's edification if she's taking notes over there. Is that acceptable? Okay.
Motion by member McLaughlin, seconded by member Graham. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Number 8, reports requested. Report on superintendent's goals which was tabled on November 8th, 2021.
Yes, it's tabled, and I will try to bring it forward
Okay.
at our next December
It will
meeting.
remain tabled. Okay, thank you, Madam Superintendent. We have condolences. The Medford School Committee expresses its sincere condolences to the family of Anthony Tony Martin, brother-in-law of school committee member Kathy Kretz. If we all may rise for a moment of silence. Our next regularly scheduled meeting is Monday, December 6, 2021, here in Alden Memorial Chambers at 6:30 PM. Everybody have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Go Mustangs.
Have a nice Thanksgiving.
Motion to adjourn by member
Second.
Graham, seconded by member McLaughlin.